So welcome everybody to Understanding Ourselves and Others. So we're looking at the 6 critical components to a successful school return. And we're so happy that you are joining us today. We hope that you find the content we're going to present relevant to your needs. So thank you for being here. My name is Zakia Holman, and I am an educational consultant with Collaborative Learning Solutions. I've been consulting with Collaborative Learning Solutions for about 3 years now. And prior to that, I was a behavior specialist for a district, and I've been in special education for quite some time. Otzi, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thank you. My name is Otzi Sanchez. I'm also an education consultant, and I've been here for about a year now, just under. Before that, I was, well, and still am, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I was working in a school at an alt ed location. But before that, I also did some behavioral therapy with autistic children, and I've done kind of a number of different things with the schools. But just as Zakia mentioned, I'm just very excited to be here with you on this discussion today.
Awesome, awesome. So here are our session objectives. We would like to equip educators with critical skills for maintaining well-being, understand the behavior indicators for common trauma responses, and identify and implement trauma-informed techniques for successful student return. So our conversation today is really going to be centered on wellness and well-being. So I do invite each of you to sort of utilize your compassionate empathy skills, which really is the ability to integrate those cognitive and affective skills. So we're going to lean into your perspective taking skills as well as just your feelings, your overall feelings with the information that we are going to be presenting to you today. Next, we're going to just review the norms quickly. Mute and unmute. If you feel comfortable turning your camera on, that's quite okay. And if you'd like to keep it off, that's okay as well. We ask that you just lean in and take risks. Ask for clarification as needed. We have a pretty small group here, so we can adjust these norms as we need to. Ask questions in the chat and keep an open mind. Maintain awareness regarding your own potential trauma triggers. So at CLS, we really believe in connection before content. And so we really just wanted to give you an opportunity to place in the chat, you know, the most bizarre behavior you've seen displayed by, it could be a student. If you're not an educator or in the educational field, maybe it's a child or a relative that you know, but just we wanted to get a little glimpse into some bizarre behaviors that you've come across. So if you'll take a moment now and place that in the chat, we greatly appreciate it.
And just to give a quick example, actually, Kia and I had worked with a student who is, she was just quirky. She was so great. But we saw her when she had a small bag of popcorn that she had microwaved in the class. And she's about, I want to say she was about 17 years old at the time. She ate all the popcorn, then carefully opened up the bag so it was completely open, and then just started licking the butter on the inside. So at the time we were a little like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? But that was just kind of part of her quirkiness. She definitely was just herself, very authentically herself. So if you have any stories like that you would like to share, we just appreciate it, just to ground us in why we're here as far as our students and the work that we all do.
Excellent. And with that being said, when I think about, you know, the most bizarre behaviors, I won't really go into them because I've seen some pretty, you know, pretty bizarre behaviors in my work in the non-public schools and pretty restrictive settings, if you will. But when I think about bizarre behaviors, I try to think, less about the topography and what that behavior looks like, and more about the communicative intent of that behavior. So what is the student trying to convey, or the child, or whomever we're working with? What are they trying to convey? What's the communicative intent? And then what's the functionality of that behavior? Be it to gain access to something, to gain attention, escape or avoidant behavior, or sometimes just automatically some self-stimulatory behaviors that people will engage in, but really trying to make that shift, right? And then not only the communicative intent and the functionality, but also what part does trauma play in the behaviors that we see? Because a lot of time in many of the school districts that I work with, the way, as a behavior specialist, the way that I would see behavior children show up or present, if you would put that on a continuum, a large amount of that was either hyperactive, hyper vigilant, overactive behavior. So you might see aggression at a really high rate. And at the other end of that continuum, you will see more of those underactive behaviors, that withdrawal, or things of that nature, students who just wanted to shut down. And so I think it's really interesting to consider the presentation along that continuum, but also to really, really hone into what's the functionality and the communicative intent. I think also in understanding that, what it will help us to do is to be able to link students to the supports and services that they may need. And also it will help us to provide, that trauma informed care, or some say healing centered engagement that students need, right? So it's really, we have to be mindful of those things. I really enjoyed this quote here, and so I'm going to actually read it because I thought it was pretty profound. Um, Only when a child is valued for who they are as an individual can they fully open themselves up to trust and connection with caregivers. And connection is everything. And so recently that made me think of an opportunity that I had to actually train parents on equity and inclusive communities of practice. There's a gentleman, he was probably almost 60 years of age, and he's currently serving as a superintendent of a particular school district. And so he began reminiscing about, how he could still, even though he's aging, he could still vividly remember his fourth grade teacher, and he called her by name, Miss Bright. I can still remember Miss Bright just like it was yesterday. And he said he can remember her so vividly because for the first time in his life as a fourth grade student, he felt that she saw him holistically, like she saw the whole student, not just his academic performance, but she saw beyond that. Like she tapped into what are your interests, your strengths, your preferences. And a smile just adorned his face as he started to reminisce about this. And I just thought, wow, how profound is that, to really come in contact with a transformational teacher that is able to tap into the wholeness of who you are, and so that feeling resonates with me when I hear that story, and it definitely resonated with him, really finding the value in the students that we serve. All righty, so now bracing for behavior. So here, we really just wanted to talk about, it goes without saying, but the way that we do school has changed, right? We can all attest to when there is like novel stimuli in an environment, when you're exposed to something new, like COVID, like, schools closing, like just novel experiences, how that will heighten our stress level and our anxiety levels. And you couple that novel experience with the unknown, not knowing what to expect, you may see great deals, of heightened behavior that come out of that. In fact, I went to a board meeting last night and there was a student attending at the board meeting, and she talked about the stress that so many youth are experiencing right now because they're trying to meet the demands, the high demands of their teachers. Work completion is still there, right? The expectation to complete it, to do so on time, to turn on your cameras, even though you may live in an environment where turning on your cameras is really, it's possible, but is it something that I really want people to see a lens into my life? And then those expectations around engagement. And she talked about the stressors that provided not just for her in the virtual world, but for a lot of her peers. And she talked about the stressors, like the challenges that poses for her, because sometimes the norms that are established in the virtual world don't necessarily transition over into in-person learning. So I say that to say that, as our students return to school, it's really going to provide us with an opportunity to reteach, right? To really reteach a lot of these skills, the new rules, the expectations, the new schedules, routines, the ways of socializing. All those things are going to be new, and all of those things are going to necessitate that we teach and we reteach so that our students really learn. But equally important, not just the rules and the norms and all of those, equally important will be, how are we teaching our students to establish connections, a sense of belonging, a sense of community? All of that will necessitate teaching as well as we transition. So we just wanted to really highlight that on this slide, and like the confusion and the uncertainty. There's an air of that out there, and they're really looking to educators that are conscious around these things to sort of transform the environments that our students are going to go into.
Thank you, Zakia. So just kind of adding on to what Kia was just talking about, we're going to look at COVID and trauma. Especially as educators, the expectation was really high. COVID happened, schools closed. Basically, we got the instructions that, okay, we're going to teach virtually. And there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of instruction on how to do that, but it was expected on an incredibly fast timeline. And educators everywhere had to just figure out ways to adapt. And I'm pretty sure we lost quite a few educators in the process, just saying, nope, this is not what I signed up for. This is not for me. So now here we are on the other side of that, coming back into an in-person venue, right? And having to, again, just figure out, how are we doing this now in this not necessarily new, but definitely a different kind of setting that we were in before. Especially as educators, again, we tend to put the needs of our students first, the needs of our children, of our families, and we put our own whatever responses or whatever needs on the back burner. So that is something we're going to talk about actually a little bit more next week in part 2 of this presentation. But for now, we're going to just stop and focus in on the trauma piece. So what a lot of times what people consider to be trauma might be like people coming back from war, abuse, a major accident or illness, an unexpected death, all these sorts of things, right? So here we're just kind of outlining the different types of trauma. A one-time event, so one major car accident or something like that, a one-time major traumatic event is considered acute and stage 1. And not stage 1 because it's not more impactful, just stage 1 because it's only that one incident. Chronic would be multiple traumatic events occurring over time or all at once. And then we get into the complex cascading trauma, which is just one trauma that leads into another trauma that leads into another trauma. And this is where we'll see more of that toxic stress. So for example, a child walks home, he's bullied one time and beat up, taken, things taken away from him. He'll be on alert, right, for the next time. As let's say the next day it happens again, the next day it happens again. This is when it starts to become more of a toxic stress, because then that student is not, that piece of caution is still going to be there, but their brains are basically in high alert. As school starts to end, they're not thinking about what's happening in class anymore. Now they're thinking about what's going to happen to me after school. What other ways can I take? What else can I do in order to avoid this situation? So we're going to look at COVID in the same way. If we could go to the next slide. Thanks. So here's COVID as a cascading trauma. This is essentially what happened to our communities. COVID hit, we had illnesses, we had deaths, schools closed and changed. Many people lost their jobs. There's a lot of financial instability. So each one of these is a trauma in and of itself, right? If we lose somebody close to us, that's of course going to be incredibly traumatizing. So if as the schools closed and our routines were completely disrupted, that's another potential trauma. So really there's trauma occurring in many different ways in different places, and we didn't have time to heal from the one before the next one occurred. So this is what we're talking about as far as COVID as a cascading trauma. On top of this, we had the killing of George Floyd. We had the attack on the Capitol. We still have different social events that are occurring that are also considered traumas and have the same kind of effect, depending on the impact of these different incidents. Trauma is very individual. It's going to affect one person differently than it will another. But even if we consider ourselves and how much it's impacted us, we also consider our students and different ways that it may have impacted them. So this one is just kind of a visual example. This is a pre-pandemic visual of a classroom. You can see not all of the seats have hearts, but there are some red ones and there are some blue ones. So what we're looking at here is that all of the students, all of the chairs that have hearts are essentially students that have experienced some form of trauma. The ones with the blue hearts are the ones that are not necessarily showing any kind of behavioral or symptomatic things that we can observe. So this is essentially about 66%, I believe, was the study that was done. 66% of students have had some form of trauma, whether we know it or not. And this was pre-pandemic. So now, as we've had these different experiences, it's been over a year now since we've had COVID. We can imagine a lot more of these chairs having those hearts on them. So here's our iceberg of what it might look like for our students as they come back, especially those that are experiencing some form of trauma. And these might not necessarily be behaviors that are new or different. They're not things that you haven't seen before as an educator. So you might see some acting out, some aggression, some defiance. We might see a little more of this, or we might get more of the other side of it, the more withdrawn, isolated, unable to respond, that sort of thing. We're in, I would say right now, a little bit of that honeymoon period when students first come back onto campuses. At least this is what we're hearing from a lot of the people that have had students come back, is that it's going surprisingly well. Students are resilient, they're happy, they're excited to be back, they're following all the rules, and that is wonderful. And we're hoping that will continue, but we're also a little just conscientious and mindful that this might not last. Just like when we first come back from any kind of breaks, right? The students tend to be energetic and engaged and involved. And then as time goes by, we start to see a little bit more of that just burnout. We start to see a little bit more of the possible trauma response. So we see here that some of these behaviors, and Kia had kind of alluded to this a little bit initially, that some of these behaviors are coming from somewhere other than just simple defiance or disrespect. Sometimes there's a fear factor. Sometimes there's some anxiety or depression. When we consider the impact of COVID with potential homelessness, people losing their jobs or not necessarily knowing when where their next meal is going to come from. Maybe there's more anger or frustration in the home because of the financial instability. There's a lot of different issues that are pressing on our families, which of course is going to trickle down onto our students. So something that we often say at CLS is to get curious, not furious. We really want to be able to explore what some of our students are experiencing before just having some kind of visceral response. Which can be very challenging to do depending on what grade level you're working with. But really, I guess even at any grade level, they can really just start to push your buttons. So we really want to consider that whatever behaviors are coming forward might not necessarily be some just oppositional behavior. It might be because there is something more going on. So this was a poll taken in May of 2020. So it is about a year ago. But they found that 7 out of 10 teens were grappling with mental health issues. 55% reported anxiety. So more than half of these reported anxiety, 43% depression, 27% worried about running out of basic needs in their household. And this was a year ago, and this was with teenagers. And fortunately, teenagers do have the ability to express themselves a little bit more, to be able to possibly identify some of the issues that they're experiencing. But then when we think about our little ones, the ones that are, 5, 6 years old, that don't have that kind of expressive capability, or if they have been maybe started their kindergarten year virtually, they might not be comfortable, or as educators, we might not necessarily see as we would in person when something is wrong, when there's something that's just a little bit off, when they might appear a little bit more like either malnourished or dirty, or, there's a lot of little things that we can pick up on when we're in person versus virtually, when it's a lot more challenging to do that, especially when a lot of our students might have their cameras off. They don't want to be seen. They don't want you to see what's going on in the background in their homes. There's just a lot happening. So we really want to be conscientious of that and be able to focus in on what is happening, what are we capable of doing and providing for our students. So the next part we're going to talk about is the triggers. For many people that do have trauma, maybe even possibly some of us on this call that have some form of trauma from their past or even currently with COVID, there are different triggers that could potentially remind us of what that trauma is, how it felt. And typically, we kind of think of, oh, well, I see this person or I hear this person, and it triggers this memory, or maybe I'm out and about and I'm having conversation with somebody, and then all of a sudden I'm triggered. I recall something that happened to me. So this is just what triggers are, but then we're going to move on to what some of the triggers potentially can be for our students. There we go. So when it comes to triggers, we want to think about all of our senses. Loud noises. Sometimes there's things that we don't necessarily we don't expect to be a trigger for our students. Sometimes Bluetooth mode. Sorry, don't know what's going on. So sometimes there's loud noises in the classroom and we just tend to brush it off and we just kind of move on with our day. But sometimes those noises are triggering for our students. Sometimes you just want to, give somebody a pat on the back or do kind of a side hug. Sometimes those touches can be triggering. Sometimes different smells or different things that we see, or different things that even we're eating. And, I'm sure we've had this experience before, when you're eating something and then all of a sudden you have a memory of somebody else. Like I was telling my colleagues earlier that I'm making a soup for dinner. And every time I make any kind of soup, really, it reminds me of my grandmother. And it's not intentional really, but it is something, it triggers a happy memory for me. There's obviously a lot of things that happen in school and on the classroom that are not necessarily positive triggers. So we just want to be mindful of that. Even a change in routine can be a potential trigger, and that's exactly where we at. We have this huge change in routine with our students. So these are just some things that we want to be mindful of, that we want to check in with our students on. Some might not have the verbal ability to be able to say, oh, you know, hey, Miss So-and-so, you're triggering me right now, or this person is triggering me, or this sound is triggering me. So we really want to just be sensitive to that. Okay, so we're not going to do a breakout. So don't worry about that part. But what we are going to do is a Jamboard. So if Nico, if you could put that in the chat for us, please. Let's see. And then there we go. So on the Jamboard, we are going to talk about a time that either we as educators maybe misunderstood a student, and like how, you know, we want to repair that. Or we're going to highlight maybe a time that we felt misunderstood and somebody went out of their way to try to understand us, in order to really be able to maintain that connection with us and not coming to that snap judgment. Thank you, Kia.
You're welcome.
So if you're comfortable, we're going to ask that you share a little bit here. You don't have to be super lengthy or anything in your in your disclosure. You could just keep it simple, and you can either add to one or both questions. If you've never used Jamboard before, you would just go to that little square where the pointing hand, the finger is, and you pull up a sticky, add whatever you want to add, and then just hit save on that. So we will give you a moment to go ahead and do that. And please let us know if you have any questions. We have a quiet group today.
Want me to stop sharing Ozzy and we can maybe revisit it in case
Sure.
more time. Get back into the PowerPoint.
All right. So it seems like folks aren't too sherry today. Absolutely fine. Especially I think it's sometimes at this time of the afternoon, it's a little harder to really engage in some of these activities. So let's just continue forward. We are looking now at getting back to school. So some of you may already be receiving students if you are an educator, and if you're in the classroom. Some of you might still be virtual. Some of you might have children either that are returning to school or doing some kind of a hybrid situation. So right now we're just looking at these are the 6 critical components that we want to identify and really look through as the important pieces as we do return. So since there is quite a bit under each one, we're not going to get through the entire list today, unfortunately. We're going to go primarily through the first 3, which is prioritizing the SEL needs of students, clarifying rules and expectations, and then building those connection opportunities. That initial quote that Kia read was about that connection and creating those as much as possible, especially given the potential trauma that our students are experiencing, the trauma that we've experienced ourselves. The last 3, which we'll be talking about next Thursday, are around the caregiver awareness and boundaries. So that really is going to be the self-care piece, really looking at ourselves and what our needs are in order so we can better improve and give our students or the children in our lives the best that we can be. So then we'll also talk about the community of support. And also, I'm sorry, I'm losing the last one, parent voice and choice, because we also want to make sure that our families do have a space where they can speak and discuss what's going on with them. Okay, so we are going to talk about it more at the class and site-wide, like the school-wide levels to talk about what we can do. We also do have some listing on what we can do as a whole district, but it doesn't seem like we have any district folks here from what I understand. If that's wrong, please correct me. So we'll focus more on strategies that we can use in the classroom and on our school campuses.
Right. Thanks, Otzi. So here we're really looking at creating a trauma responsive school. And in order to really do that, you'll see under there it says it is our duty to create an environment where all children feel safe and secure. But really, in order to do that, we really have to talk about infusing those protective factors into that environment. So really looking at safety, looking at, what's the degree of certainty that we provide for students? Is there some predictability that we provide for students? And then how do we do that? So yes, there are environmental manipulations we can make, if you will, to provide some predictability, and that can come into 2 forms, really. We can look at those arrangement strategies, right? So we can look at things we do for people in order to ensure that there is predictability, but we can also look at, teaching strategies, things we can teach students to do for themselves to ensure that predictability. And then along those lines, also, another protective factor that we would be looking at is what degree are there compassionate relationships within that environment? What about voice and choice and the opportunity to collaborate? Is that present? Because all of these things are going to help support that responsive school system and environment. We can't leave out such things as cultural responsiveness as well, making sure that we are responsive on a cultural level to the needs of our students. And although the training is student specific, we want to take in the needs of our staff members as well, right? Because as Ozzy talked about, trauma is so prevalent, right? It doesn't bypass or discriminate because you have a certain title or position, right? And so we really want to make sure that those protective factors are present. And the last one, and we're going to talk about these things more, but I just wanted to put them here so that you can think about them. But skill building and SEL skills, right? We want to make sure that we have those 6 protective factors present so that we are indeed creating that trauma responsive school. And that is going to be, if we do that intentionally, then the climate and the culture of our school campuses will transform in a positive way. So here are just some other just clarifying routines and expectations. I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with like the behavior expectation matrix, which PBIS supports. But we just wanted to look at the class-wide, school-wide, and district-wide on those different levels. Are we clearly outlining and defining, what those behavioral expectations are? Again, do we have visuals to support the learning so that students are aware of what's expected of them, not necessarily through just giving a lot of verbal cues, because those are the hardest cues to fade. When you just give so many verbal cues, sometimes people become prompt dependent upon those cues. But really moving into being able to have visual stimuli present so that they can almost self-manage their own behaviors, even if those behaviors are trauma-induced. And what I don't want us to take away from today is that we are trying to excuse behaviors. No, when these behaviors occur, we want to actually acknowledge them, but then also acknowledge what could be potentially the root cause of these behaviors. Now, if you come at it that way, and like Atsi said, if you get curious instead of furious, then that's really going to inform your interventions. But if you're upset by what you see, then and you're reacting out of an emotional state, sometimes it's hard to kind of work the system as it was designed, if you will. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. But these are just things that we're talking about, on that class-wide level, the school-wide level, and then also, as Asi mentioned, what would this look like on the district-wide level? And it really would look like there being alignment, in your messaging with the district goals. And then again, strong messaging around SEL and mental health so that we can break down those stigmas that are currently so prevalent. So this will just take it a step farther. And this is really just more of an example of what we just discussed. What does that behavior matrix or that expectation matrix look like? And so you can see under a lot of people have kind of adapted the 3 R's, respect, responsibility, or 2 R's in safety. And so you see that quite often on campuses. But what you may see change as we go back into school is exactly what would be the topography, what would that look like across domains or across settings. And so this is just a visual of that: smiling with your eyes, waving and acknowledging adults. What would respect look like in a classroom? And you can see how it's still based in the same vein, but it's going to change a bit as you go throughout different settings. Here's another one, and this one is more individualized, I guess you could say, but again, the whole point of it is just to ensure that the student is aware of what those expectations are. So I am respectful, and linking that to meeting that social norm now of staying 6 feet apart. I'm responsible. I wash my hands. I'm safe. I wore my mask. And this could be almost like a check in, check out, if you will. And there could be some reinforcement tied to the student actually fulfilling these contingencies, if you will.
So this one is going back to that need and desire to maintain that connection, especially because our students have been away for so long. That's essentially what they're really looking for, is that connection. So what can we do in the classroom in order to maintain that intentional relationship building? And part of it might be between us and the students. A lot of it is also going to be between the students themselves. Because some of them, especially the ones that may not have as many of those social skills, we're going to want to work on that so they are able to feel more safe and comfortable within the classroom. So we do want to be able to offer as much as we can in the way of allowing them to connect in safe, appropriate ways. So they can still feel connected with one another. If you are from a school that's done some of the restorative practices, we do a lot of circles. So, you could do a circle to teach a math lesson, to teach about the classroom expectations, to resolve some kind of a problem that's occurred. Those circles are a really great way to do that. If you're not as familiar with RP, feel free to let us know. We can definitely fill you in on that. But Kia mentioned like the greetings, right? There's you can smile with your eyes, you can smile in order to connect, you can wave. There's a lot of different no touch greetings, and actually I believe we have a visual for this one that we'll show you next. And don't worry, we'll give you the resources to all of these different visuals that we're showing you so that you're able to access and use them yourself. We want to give students oh, thank you. So this is just the sample actually that we've grabbed from you folks in Washington. So these are just some of those different ways to be able to create those connections between the students, even when they can't necessarily be hugging each other. So just an idea there. And with the older students, they're usually able to have that conversation on their own. So you can even ask them how they want to connect, or what connection feels like for them, since they can't be in as close a proximity. Can we go back to that last one, Kia?
Sure, sorry.
Thanks.
Mhm.
So another thing we could potentially do is the check-in, check-out that Kia mentioned. In the classroom that we were in, we did a 1 to 5 rating scale. So every morning we would have all the students get into a circle, and everybody would rate themselves on a scale from 1 to 5, depending on how they were feeling. So if I was a 1, I'm feeling terrible, and if I'm a 5, I'm feeling fantastic. And they were also invited to share a little bit about why they were feeling that. So it was great on a lot of different levels. It was great because we knew from the get-go then where the students were at that day. So if I have a student that comes in and says, I'm at a 2, I don't want to talk about it, I know I need to go check in with that kiddo a little bit later today and make sure that they're okay, or if there's anything that they might need. It was also helpful for us as staff, because we were also included in the checking in and checking out. So for me, I would get in, and sometimes I was scrambling. I was, grabbing breakfast and trying to brush my hair and running out the door and driving. So I wasn't necessarily checked in with myself when I was starting the day. So that was really beneficial even for me to be able to check in with myself and go, okay, where am I at today? And it was helpful for the students, because if I did say, you know what, guys, I'm at a 3 today, I got a ticket on the way to work and I'm still kind of working through that. I'm going to have a cup of coffee and I'm hoping my score will be a little bit better. So then that kind of transparency also allowed them to know, okay, this is where she's at today. If I'm acting a little off or differently than I usually do, then the students are very aware of that as well. We also did check out at the end of the day, which gave us kind of an indicator of, if a student is checking out at like a 1, then it kind of gave us that red flag of, okay, maybe I need to check in with what's going on at home with that student. So that's a really great way to create that connection, not only between us and our students, but also between the students themselves, because then it allows them to kind of get a gauge on each other as well. If they have a friend who's checking in lower, then they might want to reach out to that friend and say, hey, what's going on? So a really great way to create that connection. And again, we do have resources on a lot of these interventions that you'd be able to use tomorrow if you wanted to. We also want to ensure that messaging is reinforced by admin, that everybody is giving the same message. If I'm saying, this is the rule in my classroom, but then it's different on campus, then that's going to create a little bit of an inconsistency. So we definitely want to make sure that whatever the rules are on the entire campus, those are the rules that we want to reinforce in our classrooms as well. And one last thing on this point was just that we want to make sure that students have easy access to support from administrators. If there is something that is going on, whether in the classroom or outside, they're not comfortable sharing with their teacher, we want to make sure they have some kind of a kind of like suggestion box sort of a thing where they'd be able to say, hey, I really want to speak to somebody about this issue. We are looking at the prioritizing the SEL needs. Sorry, I was, I was going back and forth between the connection opportunities and the SEL needs. So I apologize if I'm confusing anybody. These are other ways of really prioritizing SEL. I'm not going to spend too long here just because we have a whole slew of resources that I really want to be able to spend some time on and show you all, because I think that's really what is going to be beneficial for you as we do return to school. We have a short survey. If you could complete that on today's training, you don't have to do it right now immediately, but we are asking that you do complete it before our time is up, or maybe even shortly after if you want to wait and see what the resources look like. But just please, if you could take the time to give us some feedback, it really helps so that we can make sure that our trainings are going to be beneficial for not only you guys, but then everybody that we train in the future. So let's move on to the resource list. There we go. So Nico has included that. Let's see. I can share that actually, Kia. All right, so while you're filling out that survey, we can take a look at the resources. Okay, so if you have that resource list open, you're going to see a giant list with a ton of different links. Each of the links is tied to a different component of returning back to school. So I'm not going to speak too much on these bottom ones just because that has more to do with our next session when we're talking a little bit more about those boundaries, community building, and the parent voice and choice. We will look a little bit at these top ones just so that you all can kind of see what might be the most effective for you right now. So the first one I want to take a look at actually is the safety visuals, just because I have seen a lot of folks already using these. And I'm sure as classrooms come back that you're looking for some of these visuals to put up in your classroom. So let's see, I believe it was the pandemic resources. So here you can, I'm sorry, can we see this page? Okay, I want to make sure it wasn't still on the other form. Okay, so you can see there's one here about being safe and washing your hands. There's in English and Spanish. There's also some resources for parents on helping their child during the pandemic. There's some things here about wearing masks. So please feel free to go in here. There's a lot of different really great resources. So please access these. Use everything you can, right? So that is the first one. Let me go back here. Okay. There's also some resources here about developing practices for norms, reflections, and feedback. And then of course, using PBIS. So feel free to explore on here. I'm not going to jump into every single one because otherwise we'd be here all evening, and I want to make sure everybody's getting home to their families. But I did want to also highlight the check-in, check-out. We talked a little bit about that. This is a fantastic website. Please use this one. There's a lot of great stuff in it that gives you all kinds of different interventions, including for different SEL lessons. So, and it's broken down here, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So if you do have some of those kiddos that are a little more challenging, or that might have some of that, more of that trauma response, you can also look at these different areas in order to kind of see what would work best for them. So you can kind of see different things that you might want to work with them on, nonverbal cues and signals, or social stories, relationship skills, right? Especially right now, that's what they might need to work on the most, is those social and relational skills. But there is the check-in, check-out over here. There's behavior intervention plans and contracts. So everything you could potentially need is here. So just this website alone is going to give you a lot. So that's another great one. I mean, really all of these are great. I would not have included them if they weren't something you could definitely use. One that we didn't talk too much on is a screener. Um, of course, we don't necessarily have the ability to go in and screen each and every single one of our students, but SAMHSA does have a really great way of being able to screen for some of the potential situations that our students may have experienced. And it's helpful for us to know too that this is what we're dealing with right now. At the beginning of this training, we even asked like, okay, well, what is your role? So that we can kind of tailor the conversation to what your role is and what you're looking for today. This is kind of along those same lines. We want to know what our students are bringing into the classroom so that we know how to focus in and to support them in the best way so that they can continue to learn. So there is a screener there ready for us. There's also a screening behavior list that's related to COVID. Circles, like I mentioned before, circles are such a great way of building community and maintaining some of those connections for our students. So there's a little bit more information here. Daily SEL school year. So this one, I believe, let's see. Yes. So this is SEL lessons. They are broken down by each day. So if you wanted to go in here right now, pick up a lesson for tomorrow, you would just have to scroll down to get to the date and you would be able to introduce that immediately. So I'll show you one of them just because they're really cool. You don't have to do every single one of these activities. You can choose one and decide, okay, this is the one that I want to do. Actually, if you were at our webinar last week, we introduced this one as a great resource to use. Kids tend to like this one, caption this image. Memes are alive and well, and everybody is using them. So kids can really get creative with adding what the meme might be saying. But there's a lot of great ways of incorporating the social emotional learning into different parts of the day rather than just, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, I'm going to be doing my SEL lesson. When it is incorporated throughout the day, it allows for more of that emotional expression as well as that connection. So we definitely want to use these as much as possible. So this is another great one to to access, to use. Look through these and see which ones you think might be the best for you and what your needs are. But I definitely encourage you to go through. I know there's kind of a long list, so maybe don't go through all of them in one sitting, but take a look and see what might be most beneficial for you. There's morning meetings. So we talked a little bit about our 1 to 5 scale that we used with some of the older kids that we worked with. If you work with more of the little ones, sometimes you want to do something more like this, something that's going to be a little bit more structured, more colorful, something that is going to allow the students to engage maybe a little bit easier. So there's a lot of great resources here. Let's see what some of the other ones are that we have in here. We've got SEL lessons for teachers and support staff. We have, so CLS, Collaborative Learning Solutions, also creates our weekly SEL lessons. And that's typically just a short video you can show to your students, and then a few questions to just allow them to think on it, observe a little bit more, do some of that awareness work for themselves, and think about some of their connections and relationships. So this is another good one that you can use if you are looking for more lessons that are they're ready-made. There's a lot of different topics between mental health, anxiety, the impact of COVID. So there's a lot of different lessons and things that you can also just grab from here, depending on what your needs are, what lesson you want to teach. So this really is just kind of the meat and potatoes of where we want you all to be able to go and check out. There's different apps as well that you can look at that are also helpful. This Greater Good, it's also Greater Good. It's Greater Good in education. It's also down here. And then we have it broken down in a couple of different places. So that's also a really great place where you can find some lessons that are already ready-made that you can just use immediately. So that's all I'm going to show on this for now. Were there any questions, comments, anything we can clarify for you all while we still have you? sitting here. No, all right. So if you haven't done so, please complete the survey. We are going to, hold on, here we are. So I just want to be able to share really quickly on some other training opportunities that we have. Let's see. So we have the Community of Equitable and Inclusive Practices. Both of these are at no cost to participants. So we definitely want you to be able to take advantage if you are interested in this first one. It says targeted participants, teachers, parents, and students. We just want to clarify that the groups are done specifically for each group, not all groups together. So it's not teachers and students together and we're doing this community training together. It really would just be a group of students working on this together, a group of parents that are working on this together, a group of educators that are doing this together. So if these are things that you might be interested in, we've got Nico's information there at the bottom. Please feel free to reach out to him. And then we also have actually next week, of course, part 2 of this presentation. So if you are interested, we are going to complete the 6 critical components, and again, discussing self-care and community building, as well as parent voice and choice, because we definitely want to involve everybody in the return to school, because it isn't just students and it isn't just teachers that have to bear all that burden. It really is a community effort. So I believe that is it. Kia, did I miss anything?
I think that's all. I just wanted to say thank you all for your attendance. Thank you for your time. I do believe that's the most precious resource we have. So the fact that you were willing to engage with us in this experience, we are so grateful for that. So we hope to see you for part 2 coming up here soon.